Wanted to talk about the Cook County Administration building fire from 2003. It claimed 6 individuals through smoke inhalation on a stairway that had doors left open and allowed smoke to enter into that protected area. Let me show you a few details on that particular fire, which drove some changes to the existing building code that we have today. So the Cook County Administration building was a 35-story structure with a couple additional stories for mechanical room and various facility operations room at the very top of the penthouse. This structure was unique because it was a concrete reinforced structure, so it had very good resilience in terms of fire performance. The 2003 fire started on the 12th floor. It was an office occupancy. What was interesting about this structure that kind of had some similarities with other buildings at the time, the ones constructed at the similar time as the World Trade Center 1 and 2, was it capitalized on an open office floor plan. So it used an exoskeleton to support most of the structure, as well as an internal area with your elevator shafts and interior exit stairway enclosures. The fire's origin was in a storage room, and the deaths occurred in a southeast stairway. And the southeast stairway, what's interesting, it was right across the hall from the storage room, across from a corridor. And when the firefighters responded, they came up the stairs, elevators, and they had attacked this fire. But what they did do is they brought up their equipment through the stairway, and as people were egressing from the upper floors, keep in mind 35 occupied stories, this is on the 12th, you had people coming down. When they encountered that stairway, that level where the firefighters were, the firefighters directed those people to go back up. And I'll get into it here shortly, but at the time, the code did not actually, at the time this was constructed, the code did not require all of the doors from inside a stairway to be unlocked. So because the firefighters, they left the door open so smoke could get into the stairway, and then they directed the occupants of the building to egress back up through the stairway so they didn't interface with firefighters coming up from the first floor. What that resulted in is the individuals going up into the smoke. They couldn't actually access floors that had open doors, and that's what resulted in those 6 fatalities. What was interesting about that is there was a woman that called on her phone and was talking to dispatch that you actually had this recorded, and you could hear the voice slowly dimming over time because of smoke inhalation, carbon monoxide poisoning. Basically, the 35 occupied stories, each one had basically half an acre. So a fairly large footprint for this structure, a lot of square footage. This is the plan view of the 12th floor. If you take a look, I circled the origin location of the fire. This one shows it a little bit more clearly. The storage location is located right across from the stairway. And furthermore, the fire that came from that particular storage area, it encompassed this fairly large area. Keep in mind, half an acre is on the order of 21,500 square feet. It's approximately that size. So you're looking here at a good, few thousand square feet for your actual fire area. It started at 5 p.m. on Friday, and why that's significant is this is a government building. You don't have a lot of people staying after 5 p.m. on a Friday evening working in a government facility. So there wasn't a lot of individuals to identify that there was a fire at this location. That actually credited for the fire to grow larger than it should have. If this had occurred earlier, probably would not have grown so fast. It probably would have been contained much quicker. The storage closet where this fire originated from was used to store reams of paper and envelopes and folders, and it was full. It was fully stocked, so there was a huge combustible loading. The smoke in the stairway that was right across from this location, the proximity is what caused the smoke to go into that stairway. And I'll get into it a little later, but there was actually negative pressure in the stairway. It was actually pulling smoke into the stairway. The reality is it was never determined, but most investigators think there was some arson involved. You couldn't prove it, though, is the problem. There were gasoline remnants identified in chemical trace testing from the vicinity of the storage room. But upon testimony from firefighters, they did indicate they may have refilled some of their firefighting equipment at that location. So it's really hard to prove, but what was proven is that it was not an electrical origin. The litigation payment on this was $100 million back in 2003, so significant sum of money. Now, at the time this was constructed, the code, oddly enough, allowed for fire barriers. Okay, so fire-rated construction of the corridor, just for the walls, the vertical sources, to be fire-rated. The ceiling actually was not fire-rated. So in this case, you have this NIST FDS, fire dynamic simulation. This is a smoke view rendering of that. What you had is the storeroom, within 5 minutes of fire ignition, you had it actually burn through the false ceiling and go into the corridor. Now the walls are fine, but the ceiling was unrated. Now in today's International Building Code, you would never be allowed to do that, but at the time this was constructed, it was feasible. This is a picture of that storeroom showing what it looked like and the destruction involved. This is the same general vicinity, but from the south. And if you look, this is an important aspect. So the stack effect is the concept of a hotter air being more buoyant. It has less density and consequently it rises. Your shafts within that structure sucking air from the point of fire origin up and out through upper floors. So it allowed a lot more smoke to exit. And this shows that this is some software that was used by NIST to actually generate where the neutral axis was, and it identified it was about the 20th floor. In red, this shows where the fire floor was. So there's some really neat things you can learn from this. The first is the necessity to shut doors within a structure. So one big failure on the part of the individual that identified this fire was that that person did not shut the door. If that storeroom had been shut when the fire was identified, you wouldn't have had a flashover scenario. And it's that flashover that enabled the roof, the ceiling to be easily destroyed and for the flames to go over to the corridor and spread smoke and also fire throughout that floor. The storeroom should have self-closing doors. So if you're designing a structure, you really need to keep in mind the necessity for self-closing doors, and also as part of your fire protection strategy for your overall fire protection manual or plan that you have for a facility, have training that also includes the necessity for occupants to shut doors if they identify fires going on. So that was something they failed to do. The other thing to keep in mind, this building was not suppressed. High-rises actually were not required by code to be suppressed until I think the mid or late 80s. It was fairly late. And the reality is it's not a problem. You look at the Trump 2018 fire, that likewise was a high-rise, New York City, but no suppression. They relied on fire barriers. This fire would have been contained if that ceiling would not have had, or would have been fire rated. In this case, it was not fire rated. That was real the issues. So what recommendation from NIST anyway is consider, municipalities really should either enforce or consider enforcing the requirement to suppress retroactively existing high-rise structures. Very expensive, but it would have controlled the fire and saved a lot of money, as I'll show you. So the fatalities would not have occurred if the door to the southeast stairway would have been kept shut. So the problem was, as I mentioned before, firefighters on the 12th floor propped open that fire door that protected the exit stairway enclosure, allowing the smoke to be sucked into the stairway. That led to the fatalities. I mentioned before it was because the doors were locked, but there wouldn't have been smoke there to begin with if the door had not been left open. So an important takeaway from that is the necessity for firefighters always to be trained on maintaining those exit enclosure structures, your horizontal exit, things like that, as smoke-free entities by keeping those rated doors shut. Locking of stairways from inside the enclosure resulted in deaths. I actually just went through a video 2 days ago from the time that I'm issuing this discussion on section 10.10.2.7 of the 2021 IBC. I don't like, in 2006, IBC made a change to that section, or the applicable section, and it prohibited a previous exclusion from the 2003 edition of the IBC that allowed you to lock doors inside the stairways up to 4 stories. But because of this fire in 2003, the 2006 edition eliminated that caveat. Now the reality is you've never had fatalities from like a 2-story building because you had locked interior doors. So that it's kind of a big issue to think about. I personally think the IBC should be amended to allow exit access stairways to bypass this requirement. It really would help in secure environments, such as when you're doing government-related classified work, or you have, let's say you have munitions development, a company that creates something that's extra sensitive. You need the ability to lock those doors from interior stairways, but right now there's no allowance for that. Take a look at this. What you'll notice, this is the NIST's mock-up of the fire. It produced rapid flashover, and the ceiling actually failed fairly quickly. This is a smoke view rendering from FDS, and what it does is it shows you how, because of the negative pressure on the 12th floor, the smoke was actually drawn into the stairway leading up, and that's actually what caused the fatalities. So the building design in reality was successful. I mean, you have to credit the fact the structure limited fire growth to just the 3rd floor, just about 3,000 square feet on the 12th floor. You didn't have an expanding fire, and keep in mind this was an unsuppressed building with an open office area floor plan. So the fact that it didn't significantly damage the structure, it's still in use to this day, really is a tribute to just how well reinforced concrete works for structural design. The 6 deaths in the stairway was due to the firefighters' lack of training in keeping the door propped open and directing occupants back up into the smoky environment. The low occupancy of the building at the time of the fire was a contributor from the perspective of not identifying the fire, but I think also saved lives. If the fire was permitted to grow significantly, let's say at 2 p.m. on a Friday, and you did have the same situation of the doors propped open, you'd have a lot more than 250 building occupants. So that's how many people were in the building at 5 p.m. on Friday afternoon. Now half of them used the elevator, the other half used the stairways. But the reality is this was a tragedy. You lost 6 lives. It resulted in what I think were overly conservative changes in the 2006 IBC. But, I mentioned before in that video I did 2 days ago that the HJ has some discretion in terms of interpretation and how you can design a building and allow things through compensatory actions to be secure. Appreciate your time. Cook County fire was actually one of the deadliest business occupancy office building fires. There's much larger fires in terms of assembly occupancies, hotels, things like that. But as far as business occupancy, I don't think, other than the World Trade Center, but that was a little bit different and not necessarily an organic fire, this was the deadliest at 6 fatalities. So it was significant. It ranks up there, and there are definitely some lessons learned from this. Hey, thank you for your time. I hope you have some benefit in looking through this video, and have a great day.